Thank you very much, and thank you again for inviting me to this very interesting and very quite different seminar. And my talk will also be slightly different from the previous talks. And so Patrick said, when he started working on climate in 2009, I'm going to talk about transition, and most of my career has been about transition and thinking about how you achieve change and how you balance different mechanisms for bringing about change. And actually, in 2011, inspired very much by my conversations with Patrick at the time, we at EBRD we launched the first low carbon transition report, and as far as I know, was the first one in the MDB system. And so when I came to China working for AIIB about 3.5 years ago, and a few months after, even a month after I had arrived, President Xi announced this very ambitious target for China, the dual targets, peaking by 2030 and net zero by 2060. And we thought of what could we do to sort of contribute to this, incredibly ambitious targets. And we formed a little group with Patrick and some other academic colleagues, and we worked with local Chinese colleagues as well to think about how could we help conceptualize what kind of conceptual framework could we use to support that process. And so what I'm going to talk about is first, of course, what the challenge is, but then how to use this kind of framework for thinking about not only about China, but also about other, particularly focused on developing economies. But actually the framework can be applied, I think, to basically any economy. So I think we don't need to be reminded about the global challenge we are facing. And I think it's fair to say that this battle against climate change will be won or lost in Asia. Asia emits now more than half of all the global greenhouse gases, and there are also incredibly rich opportunities, particularly when it comes to renewable energy in Asia. So both sort of a challenge, but also an important upside. And of course, as multilateral development banks, we are trying to think about how we can contribute to this. So none of these institutions were created to contribute to or to focus on climate change, and all of them are now in one way or another trying to repurpose themselves to think about this challenge. So what is the challenge? Well, you could argue that this is the greatest challenge to state capacity to date everywhere. So not only in emerging developing countries, but particularly in developing and emerging economies, because that's where this capacity is often in the shortest supply. And we'll need a complex mix of different governance mechanisms. We need planning, we need markets, we need financial governance, we need industrial policy. And so what I'm going to talk about is how we try to balance these things and how they will work differently in different systems, different countries. Then we also need collaboration platforms, because China will be able to do this on its own, more or less. Obviously, also trying to learn from other countries, but it doesn't need the capital, it doesn't need the international investment. But essentially, every other country in the emerging and developing world will need this on a grand scale. And I will mention some examples from India, but India will never manage to do this on its own, given the structure of its economy. So the challenge is, how do we create the right kind of collaboration platforms? And of course, when we think about the optimal mix and how to build these platforms, we need to think about, what is the state capacity of that particular country, and what is it good at, what can it deliver and what can it not deliver. And this is both about the structure and the process. And what is absolutely essential here is that there have been a lot of ideas, and Patrick mentioned the Jet Peace, which was essentially a sort of top-down initiative from the G7 to be taken on by emerging developing economies. I think it's been, at best, a mixed success, and very much because it wasn't owned by those countries that were supposed to implement it. And I think that's what we really need to think about. And there was the spirit of, when we were working on the Chinese challenge, and now on the Indian challenge, it's about how can you get this process owned and driven by local interests. So here's again the tools. It's you need the planning instrument, you need the market mechanism. It's about carbon prices. It's about using subsidies, tax credits, other incentives. It's about financial governance, driving climate mitigation and adaptation by looking at the climate risks in portfolios of banks, and then using the banks as tools to achieve change in individual companies. And then you need industrial policy for supporting innovation, disseminating technologies, and focusing on particular industries, so on. But also you need, over time, for the balance between these different levers, you need a governance framework that sort of looks at, so this balance between these different mechanisms is going to be different in different countries, and it's going to be different over time because we're going to shift into different challenges. So take China, a lot of the focus towards the end of this transition is going to be on carbon capture and how do we get these technologies in place in time to achieve that. So here is just one academic attempt to sort of visualize the transition. And actually, I should have shown, which is truly the remarkable thing, if you see how China's carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions have increased over time, and how dramatic this change is, and that no one has ever done, I think, this kind of change in a very in this short time period that is envisioned. So, yeah. So I think you don't need to be convinced that China has a very strong planning mechanism, but it also turned out that the strength of this planning mechanism is a double-edged sword. So if you have distortions in this system, for example, you are focusing very much on energy intensity rather than carbon intensity. You had targets first implemented at the national level and then only with a lag at the provincial level and so on. So these things, when you have a very powerful planning system, you need the market mechanism to complement that. And when we looked at the system, in China, it was very clear that this pricing mechanism was lagging. Actually, when we started, there wasn't even the ETS in place. But in June 2021, it was first put in place, and that has. We learned a lot from that. We had also had some regional ETS, but I think on balance, this mechanism is still too weak. The price is too low. The trading is too low. If you look here at the, this is the trading volume and in the ETS, and you can see it. There are some peaks around the compliance dates, but essentially there's no liquidity, there's no learning, there's no information really generated in this market, and so that needs to be strengthened. The other side that we thought was not really working very well was yet. There's been, I should say that the PBOC, which has been mostly responsible for this mechanism in China, was very early on among the central banks to adopt these kind of policies. But so I will conclude, I think, with this slide. I guess giving you a little bit of a taster for how you can use these different this framework for thinking about the challenges of China. But so in China, You need more climate risk disclosure. You need to scale up the market for sustainable finance. We talked a lot about that. We need to use subsidies to promote innovation and implementation. And of course, here carbon prices are also very important for steering the activities of innovators and so on. To, so carbon price, of course, gives signals to consumers and producers, but it also provides incentives for innovation. We need to use carbon time. So I conclude with this slide. So this just, as I said, this is the greatest challenge to state capacity to date. We need to combine this mix of governance mechanisms in different ways. Of course, I haven't had a chance to talk about India, but you can imagine that the challenge there is very different. And we need to think of a different mix. And they also haven't managed to develop the pricing mechanism very much. We need a tailored country platform, so that platforms that allows international capital come in an organized way, very much working with the Multilateral Development Bank. So country should be owning this. Thank you very much.